This is the book of darkness and light. It contains a multitude of terrifying tales from all eras of time, one of which I will share with you now. Today, on the north bank of a mighty river, some 70 miles south of Prague, there stands a derelict shell of a great crescent-shaped building. It was once a world-renowned health facility. In its heyday, the institution was known affectionately by patients and practitioners alike as the Horseshoe. It is the site of this tale. The story is taken from a sworn account by Sir Simon Walpole, an expert on medieval myth and folklore. The account details Sir Simon's own brief stay at the Horseshoe, which resulted in a most singular reunion. I have often been asked the question, do you believe in ghosts? Until the circumstances that I am about to relate, I would have invariably and emphatically answered no. Ever since those events, however, I continue to find that I am not so resigned on the position. There was, I have always felt, something significant about my reunion with Robert Barraclough. Some preordained reason why I was present to bear witness. I've never been able to make sense of what took place out there in the Czech countryside. But now, finally, I feel able to commit this horrible story to paper. "8 months before the events I am going to relate, I lost my dear sister Lucy to a violent strain of influenza. The loss hit me hard. Neither one of us was married, and our parents were long since in the grave, and so each of us was all the other had. I became a mere husk, a broken man who was frankly waiting eagerly for the end. It was my dear friend, Albert Rudge, who pulled me out of this depressive mire. Albie and I had been course mates at Cambridge and had remained very close. And it was on his insistence that I registered myself as a patient at the Horseshoe Health Facility. Albie himself had been a physician there briefly after the war and spoke in the highest possible terms of its programme of innovative treatments. I, myself harboured little hope of recovering my former joie de vivre, or indeed finding any solace whatsoever. And so it was, to my very great surprise, that the methods on offer began to have an impact on my state of mind more or less immediately. In short, as the weeks went by, I began to feel better. But all of this, I must stress, is mere detail to provide an adequate prologue for what is to follow. It was, I distinctly remember, a Wednesday. I'd had my weekly assessment with Dr. Linsenmeyer, and had retired for my customary midday nap. My room was stuffy, and so I opened the window. I was enchanted for a moment by the splendid view. The great river's progress. The tall, swaying reeds lining the banks in thick rows. The small jetty onto which I had stepped just 3 weeks before. There was the ferry, just departing, and yes, emerging through the front gate was our latest resident. That the fellow was Robert Barraclough, I was in no doubt. I recognised him upon the instant. I had a sensation not unlike nervous excitement. Barraclough had been an acquaintance, perhaps even something of a hero of mine at Cambridge. In those days he was rather the life and soul of the party, charismatic with a devil-may-care spirit. He had a tendency to indulge in many a fleeting friendship, and only in hindsight have I reflected that he treated most of us quite as if we were currency. Once spent up, he would move on to some shinier treasure. But it is fair to say that Barraclough made a lingering impression on me, and here he was now, walking towards the horseshoe. How nice it would be, I thought, to catch up. And yet, as I watched him struggle through the gates, an unnameable sense of gloom began to descend. There was something disquieting about his movements. The Barraclough I had known would stride through campus, shoulders high and smile radiating. This fellow slouched dreadfully and shuffled more than he walked up the shale path. He paused for a moment, produced a hip flask and took a surreptitious nip. Then something evidently startled him. He was now staring out towards the river. He took bird-like half-steps, first this way and then that, bobbing his head as if trying to catch sight of something obscured in the reeds. I myself could see nothing. In this manner he was thus engaged for several minutes, and then, either satisfied or frustrated in his vigil, Barraclough turned towards the facility once more, and in doing so he looked directly at my window. There was a moment's pause, and then, without any evidence of surprise or shock at seeing a familiar face in this strange setting, he simply raised his hand in a limp sort of wave. Momentarily, he began trudging towards the entrance again. I cast a final glance down towards the river, and there I fancied I did see something. In the reeds. A figure, perhaps. Certainly there was the vaguest sense of someone retreating towards the water. Perhaps I should go and greet Barraclough, I thought. No. Best let the fellow settle in. I'll see him this evening. I was dining alone at my usual table, watching the sunset on the southern basin of the river, when I gradually became aware of a presence at my side. It was Barraclough, gentle and quiet as a shadow. "Barraclough!" I said. "How the hell are you? I knew it was you. Have you eaten? Food's not exactly haute cuisine, but it's passable. Grab a plate, old man, and let's catch up." "I won't," he said. "Thanks all the same." "Walpole, isn't it?" Yes, that's right." He looked entirely washed out. Perhaps his treatments were more rigorous than my own, I thought. "My word," I said. "It's been, 15 years? And how remote we are from those hopeful young men we once were." Quite," I said. He was staring out of the window. "So, are you settling in okay?" I asked. "They've given me a family room with a cot and what have you." "Oh." "Yes, I've asked them to move me." "Well, those family rooms are the biggest on offer. I should keep mum if I were you." Barraclough merely repeated himself. We chatted shallowly. I told him about my dear sister's passing and the circumstances of me being here. Barraclough was rather vague about his own reasons. I could not believe this was Robert Barraclough before me. That former bon viveur was a man transformed. "Well," I said, standing to depart. "Off for my final treatment of the day. Take care, old man." I felt a sudden pain in my forearm. Barraclough had grabbed onto me, 5 long, unkempt nails digging into my skin. "I say, you're hurting there." "Look," he said. "Can you see it down in the reeds?" "What?" I asked.
"Just look."
He pointed towards the river. I tried to calm him. "I'm afraid I didn't see anything." "Do take care, won't you? I'll see you tomorrow, perhaps." As I left him there, I heard him mutter something to himself. It was just too indistinct for me to be certain, but it sounded rather like, "Won't be long now." Next morning, before breakfast, I went on one of my walks around the grounds. It was overcast, but bright. As it was early, I didn't see a soul until I neared the riverbank. Throughout my stay, we'd been given various admonitions about straying aimlessly into the reeds, and I'd been obedient to these warnings. But, demonstrably, others were not so prudent. For somebody was stalking about in the tall plants. They were mostly obscured, but I had an impression of an incredibly thin personage with flapping clothing. Whomever it was stooping and hunched and moving erratically at quite a pace. I was about to call out a warning, but in the very next moment whoever had been there seemed to vanish from sight. The reeds were giving off a most offensive smell, something fetid, almost animal-like. I turned away and almost barged headlong into a person that was standing behind me. It was Barraclough. He was staring past me towards the reeds. "Barraclough? Barraclough!" He looked me dead in the eyes, tears swimming in his own.
"I should have done right by them," he said, "but now it's too late. Don't you see? It's too late."
I felt it would have been wrong of me to agitate him further with interrogation, and so I put a kindly arm around him and led him inside. It was several days before I had another encounter with Barraclough. I would occasionally spot him sitting in the day room or loitering in the library. Sometimes I'd spy him from my bedroom window, shuffling around the grounds. On these latter occasions, he seemed to return to his preoccupation with the riverbank, staring as if in anticipation of something that was coming. He was always alone. Everything came to a head about 2 weeks after Barraclough had arrived at the Horseshoe. I was on my way to speak to Dr. Linsenmeyer about my own imminent departure, when I spotted Barraclough, slumped in an easy chair and brazenly swigging from his hip flask. "Better not let anyone see you with your medicine there, old man," I said. Barraclough's head snapped up. His complexion was bloodless, the colour of chalk. "Whatever's the matter?" I asked, taking a seat opposite. He shook his head and tried for a smile.
Nothing to be done."
"Nonsense," I said. "It's very plain that you have had some sort of shock."
"Well, in actual fact I have. But I wonder if I ought to tell you in all honesty. That room, I shan't stay in it another night. I'll sleep down here if I have to."
"Take a deep breath," I said. "There's a good fellow. Now, tell me what's happened." Barraclough inhaled deeply, took another swallow from his hip flask, and this is what he told me.
You'll remember, won't you, that they put me in a family room. Well, the fact is, I haven't been sleeping well in there. Last night there was a bright moon. Like a damned fool, I'd forgotten to close my drapes and the light woke me. I got up to close them, and I happened to glance over at that wretched cot in the corner. Only I wish to God that I hadn't. There was bedding in it, but it hadn't been there before. Sheets with animals on. And there's more. The sheets were covering something small, and it was moving gently up and down like breathing. And then, dear God, it turned over, slowly, towards me. It did not seem human to me, but it had hands, tiny hands with thin fingers that reached out and gripped the bars of the cot. It pulled itself up to standing. It was wailing. Then it started to climb out of the cot, reaching towards me. Well, I ran, Walpole, I ran. One of the orderlies found me, marched me back to my room, despite my protests. And when we got there, the cot was empty. No bedding. Nothing. Walpole, answer me this. Down on those riverbanks, it's not farmland, is it? Nothing is grown down there, only the reeds. And so there'd be no need, would there, for there to be a scarecrow? No. No, anyway, it's gone now. Won't be long now. Soon there'll be no resisting. Barraclough was moved to a different room that same day. The following evening I received a telephone call from Albie, my old friend from Cambridge. He was calling to check on my progress and ask when I might be returning home. As was the way with us, our conversation quickly turned towards the many tales of our shared history. "Speaking of blasts from the past," I said, "you'll never guess who's recently become a resident here." "It wouldn't be Robert Barraclough." "Well, yes, exactly. Well, how on earth did you guess that?" "Oh, I recommended the place to him. Ran into him at Charing Cross last November. Took him for a brandy at my club. Poor devil. He was in quite a state. He told me he'd had some bitter disagreement with his father, and the two were no longer in communication." "You, remember his father, I suppose? A generous donor to the college, but quite the tyrant towards Barraclough. Poor fellow had no say in his own future. Immediately after Cambridge, he was established as a junior in one of the firms and made to work up the ranks, and work he did for well over a decade. Only when I saw him in November, he told me he'd been let go, hadn't even been offered a severance. He kept saying things like, "It's going to catch up with me anyhow." He wouldn't say what he meant. But I have an idea. You know about the young woman and the child, I suppose? Dreadful business. Barraclough was involved with a woman in Halifax. She worked at one of the factories. It was love, so everybody said. She fell pregnant. Barraclough wanted to do the right thing, but his father forbade the union. Threatened to cut him off entirely, and so Barraclough abandoned her. That poor woman. She was thrown out by her own family. Had the baby alone, a boy. Soon after, she left the poor little mite with the nuns at St. Augustine's Priory, and then she threw herself off North Bridge. The child died of consumption last spring. Just a year old. Since then, I gather that Barraclough has been rather a different man. There is a final incident which I must relate to bring this sorry tale to a close. It happened very early on the morning that I was due to leave the facility. I had not seen Barraclough in over a week. In truth, I'd been avoiding him. I'd fallen asleep in my chair by the window, book in lap. When I awoke, dawn was just threatening to break on a particularly misty morning. The curve of the building allowed me to observe that of the dozens of windows visible, only one was lit up, and at that window stood a figure half in silhouette. It was Barraclough. He was staring unflinchingly out towards the riverbank. With his hands he was gesturing oddly, a strange alternation between waving gaily and warding off some approaching tormentor. I looked towards the river. I saw something protruding from the reeds. The morning mist hindered my view some, but I could have sworn that it was nothing less than a long, thin arm reaching from under a tatty garment, the hand moving as if to beckon. I had in my trunk a pair of field glasses and I went to retrieve them. But a scan of the reeds this time discovered nothing at all. I must have been mistaken, I thought. I looked again at Barraclough's window. He was gone. But a moment or two later, I saw him emerge from the horseshoe by the front entrance. He moved so very queerly across the shale and through the gate. It was as though, how can I put this, he were being dragged against his will. I hammered on the window. "Barraclough!" He turned and saw me. His face was a mask of all-consuming fear, and though I could not hear, I knew from that desperate expression that he was screaming for his life. His pace quickened, and then, as he neared the riverbank, I saw some unimaginable, inhuman shape step forward, part the reeds with two horribly thin arms, and envelop
Barraclough, as if in some terrible embrace. It dragged my old friend into the darkness of the reeds, as though he were nothing more than a rolled-up carpet. I fled my room and raised the alarm. I had the presence of mind not to give the full details of what I had seen. I knew I would not be believed, nor did I fully understand it myself. A search party was mounted. The initial search, on account of the fog which had swelled and risen dramatically, was fruitless. I spent the morning with Dr. Linsenmeyer. He insisted that Barraclough had most likely just stepped out for some morning air. He sent me off for breakfast, after which time he assured me Barraclough would have returned and the whole matter would seem rather silly and distant. Barraclough's body was found just before noon. The caretaker was conducting his errands around the jetty. The remains were half submerged in the river. I saw the caretaker as he awaited the arrival of the coroner. He was talking to one of the nurses. I heard hardly anything of that conversation, except one phrase that he kept repeating. He had no skin. He had no flesh. The coroner's report suggested that Barraclough had been mauled to death by some wild animal. He had no skin. He had no flesh. That really is the end of the story. Save for this recent sequel which happened just 3 weeks ago, some 35 years after the events at the Horseshoe. I was in attendance at a lecture at the University of Geneva. The speaker was an expert in folklore studies. And though the content was interesting, the professor's soporific tone and the mug of mulled wine I'd swallowed were lulling me towards unconsciousness there in my seat. But then a new slide flashed up and banished any possibility of sleep then and for many weeks to follow. What the image showed was a charcoal impression of a beastly thin figure wrapped in tattered clothes. Its face was obscured. It was impossibly real in the rendering, quite as if the thing might step down from the slide and into the auditorium. I automatically reached into my breast pocket for my notepad and pencil and wrote down the caption as accurately as I could. Pictured is the Bubák, a most malevolent creature from European folklore. It is said to haunt riverbanks, and in its most common form is said to resemble a half-human scarecrow. It lures those whose souls weigh heavy with guilt and shame by imitating the sound of a crying infant. It is said to weave its terrible rags from the skins of those whose souls it has stolen.